her stature with the president and with those around him was really only going one direction, and that was down.
Hey, everybody, and welcome to Here's the Scoop from NBC News. I'm Yasmin Vasugian. Today on the show, hospital costs have been outpacing inflation for years, and patients, they're sinking in medical debt. The latest report from our Unaffordable America series. Up first, though, in a Truth Social post today, President Trump said that Attorney General Pam Bondi would be, quote unquote, transitioning to a new job in the private sector, and that Deputy Attorney General Todd Blanche will step in to serve as acting Attorney General. So while the president called Bondi a quote-unquote great American patriot and a loyal friend who faithfully served as my Attorney General over the past year, senior administration officials tell NBC News that the president fired her after becoming frustrated with her in recent days. The Justice Department did not immediately respond to a request for comment. So I want to bring in NBC News senior White House correspondent Garrett Haake. Hey, Garrett.
Hello.
Okay. Pam Bondi is out, longtime loyalist of the president. She was literally at the Supreme Court with him yesterday for the birthright citizenship hearings. What do we know about her firing per the timing and why?
Well, she spent a good portion of the day with him yesterday. She went with him to the Supreme Court, and she was here at the White House late last night for his speech on Iran. But Yasmin, I think the writing has been on the wall here for at least a couple of days that this was going to happen. Whether the president pulled the trigger at some point during their day together yesterday or whether he did it this morning is something we still don't know just yet. But we started to get reports about some kind of confrontation, heated conversation that they had in front of other people at the White House last week. We had been getting reports that the president was calling around, asking about her with, other cabinet members, with donors, with friends. Those are typically signs that he's ready to move on from somebody. Going back to the first term, certainly had been the case in this term. And really no one from the White House was stepping up to defend her or suggest that these reports were wrong or that the president wasn't frustrated. What we were getting from the White House was essentially, she's still here today, with this sort of emphasis on the idea of today, and that this firing, which I think is really what this amounts to, despite the language from the president's Truth Social post, was probably going to happen sooner than later.
What was the major frustrations with Bondi from our understanding?
I think there's a couple of things here. Going back to September, that was really the first time we got a whiff of these frustrations. Folks may remember when the president posted something on Truth Social that looked like it was meant to be a direct message to Pam Bondi. It begins with him saying, Pam, and then focuses on what he felt at the time, and I think still feels, was that insufficient vigor being put into the prosecution of his political enemies. He talked about Letitia James, Adam Schiff, a couple of other people. The president has been frustrated for a while that the DOJ isn't doing what he thinks it should to go after those folks. He wanted to see aggressive prosecutions, and they weren't happening to his satisfaction. And I think the other part about this has been her handling of the Epstein files, which has been clumsy from the jump, suggesting very early on in the administration that she had the files on her desk, ready to go, handing out information that turned out to be pretty much nothing to a bunch of conservative influencers within the first few weeks of the administration. And then this kind of slow, ham-handed rollout of the files since the law was passed to compel their release. The president and his staff here at the White House, his team, have just been wholly unsatisfied with the way in which that's been handled, and the fact that the president has had to be kind of the tip of the spear on taking questions about Epstein, not the attorney general who, in the view of some people around the president, got him into this mess in the first place. And so I think those things were sort of compounding series of errors that she had been responsible for, at least in the president's mind. As to what was the straw that broke the camel's back, I think that's still very much kind of a target for us today and this week. But her stature with the president and with those around him was really only going one direction, and that was down.
What is Pam Bondi's legacy after having served in the Trump administration as the attorney general? Because she did execute on many things that the president did, in fact, want, going after his, presumed enemies. There were many things in which the president, it seems, had instructed Bondi to do that she followed through on.
Yeah, I mean, look, guessing a legacy long-term is always a little bit challenging, but as I sit here today, I think it's probably, at least in part, that she was responsible for or was at the watch for the erosion of the typical firewalls, the typical distance between the Department of Justice and the White House. I mean, all of these agencies with cabinet secretaries are nominally independent to one degree or another. Some considered historically much closer to the executive branch, and some historically have operated with a much greater degree of independence. The DOJ is at the farthest end of that spectrum as the agency that operated with the most political independence from the White House ever since Watergate. That is no longer the case in Donald Trump's Washington, and Attorney General Pam Bondi oversaw that change in her time in the job.
You know what that makes me think of, Garrett, is, you and I obviously have been working together basically since Trump 1.0. And we talked a lot then about how the president would call Bill Barr his attorney general, right? And we would talk a lot about the separation of powers within the branches of government and how Bill Barr was not the president's attorney, right? He was the attorney general for the United States, right? But it makes me think of it when you talk about how Pam Bondi basically made that jump and became essentially the president's attorney.
Yeah, I mean, look, Bill Barr's a good example because this is a guy who was certainly, MAGA in his political inclinations, but also was an institutionalist. He had worked for George H.W. Bush, and he had his view of where the lines between the DOJ and the White House were, and the president had his. And when they came into conflict, Bill Barr wasn't the attorney general anymore. Pam Bondi was much more willing to cast herself as the president's attorney or someone who did the work that the White House wanted. And the great irony here, Yasmin, is the person who's going to be replacing her, at least in the short term, is in fact the president's former personal attorney in Todd Blanche, who was the president's defense attorney when he was just Donald Trump candidate in the interregnum between his two terms. And now, at least for now, he's been the deputy attorney general. He will be the acting AG, again, at least in the short term.
Do we think he's likely to stay on the job?
I think it's possible. I mean, he obviously has the trust of the president. I think he's pretty widely considered to be like a serious professional. I mean, he was a U.S. attorney and a prosecutor, a federal prosecutor before he was a defense attorney. He's considered, I think, in Washington to be a grown-up, and he has the trust of the president. That's a pretty potent mix. I'm not exactly clear on how the Federal Vacancies Act would apply here, given that he was already the deputy. He was already Senate confirmed for the number 2 role. But I think ultimately the president's going to want somebody with the full title in that job. He's got 3 years left on his term. I can't imagine him just shifting the deck chairs around every 120 days or whatever it ends up being until the term is over. But I think Blanche has as decent of a shot as anybody else in holding onto that job longer term.
It's coming just a month after the firing of Kristi Noem, the Secretary of Department of Homeland Security, now no longer. Is this kind of the beginning of cleaning house, right? We didn't see any firings in the first year of his second presidency, but now we've seen 2 so far in just a matter of 1 month. What's next?
Yeah, look, we'll see. I mean, there have been plenty of rumors and reports of the president's frustration with other members of his cabinet in recent weeks. But I think one of the big differences between Trump 1 and Trump 2 has been his reticence to come out and fire people quickly. He talked a lot as a candidate, his acknowledgement that one of the big weaknesses in Trump 1 was, in his view, how it was staffed and the people he surrounded himself with. In Trump 2, they tried to eliminate that weakness by bringing in more people who were more loyal, kind of cutting out positions that they didn't feel like were necessary close to the president. And also, when they felt the need to move on from people, they've tried to keep them in-house. Even Kristi Noem has basically a patronage job still in the administration, working at the State Department on one of these kind of side projects. Keeping people in the tent keeps them from going out and trashing you on cable TV or on the podcast circuit. That's cut down on the sort of outside chaos in this version of Trump 2. Whether this is sort of a harbinger of a change in that regard to come, I think remains to be seen. But you still have Susie Wiles, the same chief of staff at the helm, who's still sort of the architect of that strategy of like not taking people who know where all the bodies are buried and making them mad at you by firing them and embarrassing them.
Garrett Haake, thank you.
Thank you.
So the war with Iran has left gas prices soaring. And then you have inflation, which has been eating into household budgets across the country. But there is another cost that is rising even faster, and that is healthcare. Insurance and hospital bills have been outpacing inflation for years. For millions of Americans, the Sophie's choice of whether to pay the mortgage or pay for the surgery that actually saved your life, it's not hypothetical anymore. It is reality. So for that, I want to bring in NBC News senior financial and investigative reporter Gretchen Morgenson, who has been digging into this as part of our NBC series, Unaffordable America.
Hi, guys.
Hi, Gretchen.
How are you?
I'm good. It's great to see you in studio
So
here.
nice to see you.
This is a really important story. And I think what's so interesting about today versus even 20 years or so ago is when I was growing up, the cost of insurance did not seem to be as much of a thing, right? It didn't seem to be a concern the way it is now. In 2025, KFF, which is a health policy nonprofit, estimated the average cost of insurance for a family of four was about $27,000. And if we compare that to the median U.S. income, according to census.gov, that's around $83,000, right? So $27,000 of 83 is a lot of money for a family of four. Why is it that insurance seems to have become a luxury item? What contributing factors have gotten us here?
It's really the cost of the healthcare that is making the insurance go up, i.e. hospital prices. Hospital prices have gone up far faster than inflation, according to Zach Cooper at Yale University. He's done a study on this. And so what happens is the insurance companies say, okay, well, we're not going to eat those costs.
Yeah.
We're going to pass them on to you and you and you and you and all the people who are insured. And good grief, if you're not insured, you are even worse off, because then the hospital just charges you their so-called list price and you really, really are in trouble. And as you know, Yaz, medical debt is the main reason consumers file for bankruptcy.
What role is the Affordable Care Act playing in any of this? And also now the current president, President Donald Trump's big, beautiful bill?
Well, it's going to increase by at least $10 million.
The big, beautiful bill?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. Because of a couple things. One is that the ACA subsidies will go away for a lot of people. They'll have to pay way more for their insurance. Won't be able to afford it, so they'll have to go uninsured. And then Medicaid work requirements are also going to bounce a lot of people from the insurer rolls.
So you're going to have people that are uninsured in a time in which healthcare is higher than ever before.
Correct.
In which literally going into the emergency room and getting something routine like stitches costs a heck of a lot more today than it did 20, 30, 40 years ago.
Absolutely.
You spoke to a lot of people, folks that are facing really high deductibles so that their insurance costs are actually lower, out-of-network surprises as well. What are some of the things that you heard?
First of all, people are completely flummoxed by the problems that they face when they go to a hospital. You can't shop for an affordable hospital. You can't look at the prices ahead of time, even though there was a law written, in 2021 requiring hospitals to post their prices. And this was supposed to make it easier for, if you're having elective surgery, say you need to have your ACL replaced, you can go and find a hospital that might have a price of that you could afford. Well, these files are impossible to read. And so there is just a real black box element to hospital pricing. You also have this really interesting element of charity care. So, for example, if you're a nonprofit hospital, you are required to offer financial assistance programs to patients, because as a nonprofit, you don't pay taxes at the same rate that a for-profit hospital would. And so the give and take on that is, okay, if you're not going to pay taxes, we're going to make you offer more financial assistance to people, okay? So I hear from people all over that they can't get the answers they need on the financial assistance programs from the hospitals.
You mentioned the high cost of care, and you spoke to a guy in Texas, Randy Slaughter, right? What happened with Randy?
Well, Randy went to the hospital in College Station, Texas. He was having extreme stomach distress, went to the emergency department, and they never were really able to determine what was causing his distress, but they did do a couple of procedures. He was there for 3 days. And the bill that he received was something like $33,000.
And he didn't get a heads up on that?
Well, he asked for an estimate.
Okay.
He also asked whether he might qualify for financial assistance because of his income. He felt that his lowish income might enable him to take advantage of that. The person who came into his hospital room, according to him, said, no, you don't qualify. Now, so, he assumes that's right. And so he gets the bill. Now, he's insured, yes. So he's not even one of the worst off people. He's insured.
But with a very high deductible.
His very high deductible, $10,000 deductible. So he ended up receiving the out-of-pocket bill of around $9,300. Anyway, so he had to pay that out of pocket because his deductible was so high. So he starts paying it. He can't afford to pay it right away. He calls the hospital. They give him the opportunity to have a monthly pay down of this.
Okay.
And one day he goes on their website thinking, I'm just going to look at the financial assistance program. And it's like a year later, 9 months later after the surgery. He goes and he finds it, and he sees that he believes he qualifies because of his income level.
So he actually made a call to the billing department of Baylor Scott and White Medical Center in Texas. And we actually have some of that phone call that he made, making that appeal to them about the financial assistance and lack of knowledge about it.
And this is just one of his calls. He had many.
I cannot afford to keep making these payments. I need assistance. Had I been informed that I did qualify, I would have applied for the financial assistance from my hospital bed on my tablet. But I was told I didn't qualify.
So then what happened?
He was told he didn't qualify. First, because he made too much money. Then the second reason he didn't qualify was because he had missed the 1-year deadline. So this was all extremely frustrating for him. And he and I connected, and I went to the hospital and told them, his story, chapter and verse. And the hospital, they didn't want to talk about his particular care because of the privacy regulations, of course. But ultimately, yes, it turns out that they gave him some of the money back that he had already paid after we called. And they wiped his remaining balance clean.
And did they give an explanation as to why?
They didn't really, but it was one of those things where you sort of wonder if the spotlight on the problem creates a motivation that might not have been there otherwise.
So in your reporting, what does this come down to? Why are prices skyrocketing when it comes to medical care?
Healthcare costs are 18% of gross domestic product in the United States of America. That is enormous. It is partially because you can't shop for this product. You can't go to the hospital and say, is this a better deal than that deal, right? So the prices just keep going up and up and up because they can. And the insurance companies respond by saying, okay, it's going to cost more to insure people, and they go up and up.
There's nobody holding them accountable.
Nobody holding them accountable. There was one very interesting fact that I found in this reporting, and that was looking at all the states, the United States of America, and what the average hospital charges over and above what Medicare pays for the same procedure. And these were 600 common procedures. We had this analysis done. And the average across the country was almost 5 times for those 600 procedures what Medicare pays.
Wow.
Now, in some states, very high, like Nevada, I think, was 12 times or something like that. Maryland was only 1.2 times. And Maryland has, since 1971, had a state agency that monitors hospital prices. And so it makes you wonder if it's not something that really needs to be handled by a regulatory framework in the states so that they can be sure that they're not, ripping people's lungs out.
For folks that don't have Gretchen Morgenson to call up the hospital and say, why are you charging this person so much money, and then get it wiped, don't we all wish we had one of you? What are people supposed to do? How can they be more aware when they are going to the hospital, when they are going to the doctors, when they are choosing their insurers?
I think that what patients can do is they can try to access these databases of what hospital pricing is, but until it gets to a consumer-friendly level, we are not there yet. If readers and viewers want to come to NBCnews.com to look at this story, there is a link to a tool that you can use to see to flag any kind of duplicate bills that your hospital bill might have included. So you can feed the hospital bill into this tool and, red flags might pop up. It's just a way to kind of double check.
So do your due diligence, basically, right? Ask questions, do your due diligence.
Ask questions. Ask about financial assistance programs. And especially if it's a nonprofit, that is a requirement. And so you really ought to ask very forcefully about what the financial assistance programs might be.
Gretchen Morgenson, thank you.
Thank you, yes.
All right, that's going to do it for us at Here's the Scoop from NBC News. I'm Yasmin Vasugian. We'll be back tomorrow with whatever the day may bring. And if you like what you heard and you saw, press the subscribe button. We'll see you tomorrow.
We thank you for watching, and remember, stay updated on breaking news and top stories on the NBC News app or watch live on our YouTube channel.